The name Israel comes from a patriarch in the Bible whose name was Jacob. And what does Israel mean? Fighting with God, to struggle with God. Well, 10 out of 10 for you. All right, so Israel's rebuke, we're talking about the nation of Israel. It says, Isaiah rebuked the king because Hezekiah made a grave mistake to show off his wealth and opulence to the foreigners in Isaiah 39. Isaiah predicted Babylon's plot to plunder Jerusalem, and this happened in 605 BC, when Daniel and the other royal servants were exiled to Babylon. So we did speak about this in our series with Daniel, and we're going to be actually speaking about this at the end also. But with that being said, let's turn to the Bible, to Isaiah chapter 39, and we're going to read that part. This is what we did touch on last time, but this is going to be a nice little recap. So we're looking at the book of Isaiah, chapter 39. Just going to read from 3 to 8. I'm going to run through that. So this is King Hezekiah, king of Israel. They've just outwitted the Syrians. The Syrians came to conquer Jerusalem, and Hezekiah prayed to God, and God sent one angel, and that one angel came and destroyed the whole army of the Syrians. Do you know how many people he actually killed? How many soldiers? Do you remember? It was 185,000. So this one angel came and killed 185,000 Syrians. With that, the king of Assyria packed up and went back home. So then after that, everything quelled down. Hezekiah was happy. And then the Babylonians come in, the kings of Babylon. And this is what happens. So we're going to read from verses 3 to, 8? 3 to 8 in Isaiah chapter 39. Then Isaiah the prophet went to King Hezekiah and asked, what did these men say, and where did they come from? From a distant land, Hezekiah replied. They came to me from Babylon. Babylon is modern-day Iraq. The prophet asked, and what did they see in your palace? They saw everything in my palace. Hezekiah said, there is nothing among my treasures that I did not show them. That was his first mistake, to show the enemy. And at this point, the Babylonians weren't enemies. They were just friends. They came to just check out the scene. That's all they'd done. So they didn't have any threat at that point. But he showed him all the treasures. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord Almighty. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your fathers have stored up until this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. And some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood, who were born of you, will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. What I just want to read on is that next one. I always like this last verse in 8. It says this, the word of the Lord you have spoken is good. Hezekiah replied, for he thought there will be peace and security in my lifetime. So the prophecy was that through Isaiah, that the Babylonians would come, they would destroy Jerusalem, they would steal all of his treasure, and they would take his sons off to live in exile in Babylon. But Hezekiah actually says in that last part, that's fine, at least in my lifetime, there'll be peace and safety. I don't really care about the rest of my descendants, but I will be fine. It's like a horrible selfish attitude, isn't it? That's not my problem. Thanks, Isaiah, but I've got no issue with that. You can take my sons. Crazy. All right, so that's, so with that, obviously, the Babylonians now know what King Hezekiah has got. He knows the armory. He knows how many weapons he's got. He knows what treasure. And then all they await is to come and attack. And they did this in 605 BC. The Babylonians, under King Nebuchadnezzar, came into Jerusalem, destroyed the walls, destroyed the city, destroyed the temple, burned it to the ground, took all the Jews and carried them away off to exile. And that is where we get the book of Daniel from. Daniel and Ezekiel were written during the time of exile. All right, let's go to the next part in the lesson. It says the majesty of God. Isaiah 40-66 reveals God's majestic plan. The first portion of Isaiah, chapters 1 to 39, deal with judgment. The second portion reveals a divine plan to restore Jerusalem and God's covenant people. In this opening chapter of the second portion, Isaiah uses the word comfort in its various forms at least 13 times. The book of Isaiah is a miniature Bible. Let's first look at the Bible. The Old Testament has 39 books. New Testament has 27 books. The Old Testament is really conditional. It's to do with Israel and the judgments if they don't obey God. And then obviously the New Testament is the Messiah comes, Jesus, and he comes to bring love, mercy, and grace and forgiveness. And it's the same as the book of Isaiah. The first 39 chapters is all about judgment, and then the last 27 is all about comfort, restoration, hope, and grace. Okay, so just understand that when you talk about Isaiah, people call it the mini Bible, the miniature Bible. Look at the gospel writers on your lesson. It says, all four gospel writers applied Isaiah 40, verse 3, to the narrative of John the Baptist as the voice, indeed, the heralding of the Messiah that would usher in God's kingdom and Israel's redemption. So let's go to the Bible, to chapter 40. Just keep your Bible open to the chapter 39 and 40, and then keep it there. We'll read that one verse. This is one that you're probably familiar with if you've read the Gospels. It says this in verse 3. A voice of one calling in the desert, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the wilderness a highway for the God. Every valley shall be raised and every mountain and hill made low, and the rough ground shall become level, rugged places a plain. And if you have read the Gospels, you know that that comes right in the beginning of the Gospels, and it's in reference to John the Baptist, because he was the one who comes heralding the Messiah. And he says exactly that. He is the voice in the wilderness crying, prepare the way of the Lord. And then shortly after that, he looks up and he sees Jesus coming to be baptized. And he says, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Okay, so Isaiah 40 verse 3 is a prophecy about John the Baptist, and that's confirmed in the Gospels. All right, then the conditional promise, Deuteronomy 28. Okay, we'll come back to that. Records the conditions of blessings given by Moses to God's covenant people. So keep a note somewhere in Isaiah, and let's go to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 28. We're not going to read it. I just want to maybe show you the headings. I love the headings in the Bible. They do help us a bit. So if you look at Deuteronomy, which is in the Old Testament, first 5 books. Let me just... Before Joshua, after Numbers, I think. Yeah. Deuteronomy comes from the two words deus and nomos. Deus is two. Nomos is law. To law. That's what the book means. Why? Because it's a repeat of the law. Double law. The law's already been given in Leviticus and Numbers, and this is just and Exodus, and this is just a repeat of the law. So in 28, it's a very interesting chapter because it's about the blessings and cursings of Israel. I told you before that Israel had a conditional covenant with God, as we see in Isaiah from the chapter 1. If you do this, if you're good, I will bless you. The land will be prosperous. There will be no enemies fighting you. But if you do bad and you disobey me and you follow other idols and false gods, then the plagues will come upon you. Your enemies will destroy you and things like that. So it's very conditional. So we're going to just look at 28. It says first, the heading that I've got for chapter 28 is blessings for obedience. Do you all have that? And then look at verse 15. And then if you do have a heading, mine says curses for disobedience. Yeah. So, and that's why when we read that part on the lesson, it says the verses 49 to 53. Rather just scratch that part out. And then you can maybe just write in there the blessings is from 1 to 14. So I don't know why it's 49 to 53. There's like nothing in there about the blessings. And then in this, that first part is about all the blessings. So we can quickly go to Deuteronomy and we can just look at verses 3, 4, 5. We can just read those couple. This is about the blessings. Verse 2. It says in Deuteronomy 28, verse 2, all these blessings will come to you and accompany you if. You get that word? If you obey. And these are the blessings. You will be blessed in the city and blessed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be blessed, and the crops of your land and the young of the livestock. The calves of your herds and the lambs of your flocks. Bless you, Randy. Your basket and your kneading, is a trough. Yeah, trough will be blessed, and you will be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out. So if you obey me, it's all going to be pretty peaches in Israel. But then we look at verses 15. There is another side to this, and it says, however, if you, again, if conditional, if you do not obey the Lord your God and carefully follow his commands and decrees I've given you today, all these curses will be upon you. You will be cursed, and your city will be cursed, your basket will be, everything will be cursed. All right, and then we continue to read all the rest of the curses. And these are, we've got to understand this is conditional to Israel only, not to us. As Christians, we cannot look at this and say, these blessings are for us if we obey the Lord. And if we don't obey him, then all these bad things are going to happen. And we still, I think some of us still have that mindset that God deals with nations. And he doesn't. He deals with us personally. Some people think in South Africa, the reason we're in a drought is because the people in South Africa as a nation will not turn to God. And that's why God is cursing us with a drought. And then when COVID hit, God is cursing us with the plague. And that's not true. God deals with us personally, and there is no curses for us who are in Christ. All right, we've got to understand that. There's a time coming in the future where God will again deal with the nations. Even in the book of Isaiah, we see he deals with nations. He deals with Israel as a nation, definitely, but he also deals with all the other nations. All the judgments against Babylon, Syria, Edom, Moab, all nations. God deals with national entities in the Old Testament. Nowadays, in the church age, he deals with us personally. All right, conditional promise. Let's go to witness of God on your lesson. It says, witness of God. The history of the Jews' struggle is a witness to the world of God's plan. The Jews' struggle. I think that's an understatement probably. When Israel is restored, then peace will come to all the nations. Isaiah 43, 5-6. And then that is actually on our lesson. So we're not going to turn there. On your lesson, in the little block insert, it says this. On the lesson, in that little block, Isaiah 43, it says, fear not, for I am with you. I will bring your descendants from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them back, and to the south, do not keep them. Bring my sons from afar, my daughters from the ends of the earth. This has already been in part fulfilled, because from 1948, when Israel became a recognized state, Jews from all over the world started to migrate back to the homeland, Israel. And that's where they have been. As I said on my message on Sunday, that's kind of where all the fight began. Because when they started to come back, their land was already occupied by the Arabs, by the Muslims. So they came back and said, this is our land. The Arabs said, no, well, we've been living here for like 1,000 years. It's our land. And so today is still that fight for that very, very precious bit of real estate. If you ever want to buy good real estate, it will be Israel. All right? It's the most fought over land in the world. All right, still, as we say, to this day. So that has in part been fulfilled already, actually twice, because there was one time where they were taken away in exile to Babylon, and they started to return back. So they were scattered, and they started to return back. So it partially was there. In 1948, the next part of the prophecy came in, when, again, after that, they were scattered, and they started to come back. So every time just Jerusalem gets destroyed and there's attack, like with Babylon, the Jews disperse, and then they build again. And then what happened again? The Romans destroyed Jerusalem. And again, in 70 AD, the Jews then dispersed and went to live all over the world. 1948, they started to come back again. So this has already been two-part in fulfillment and still going on. And eventually, in the future, when God restores his millennial kingdom, all the Jews all over the world will come back to their homeland. All right. Right at the bottom, it says their deliverance, referring to Israel, their deliverance did not come because of their religious practices. In essence, they could not sacrifice for sins because the temple had been destroyed. Although God forgave Israel, the Lord had to discipline them. So let's quickly go back to Isaiah. We finished with Deuteronomy. You don't have to go back there again. We're back to Isaiah. Let's quickly look at chapter 43. (22 to 25). Any questions so far? (22) says, yet you have not called upon me, O Jacob, Israel, because his name from Jacob was changed to Israel. You have not wearied yourselves for me, O Israel. You have not brought me sheep for the burnt offerings, nor honored me with your sacrifices. I have not burdened you with the grain offerings, not wearied you with the demands for incense. You have not brought any fragrant calamus for me, or lavished on me the fat of your sacrifices, and so on. So it's talking all about the sacrifices. At this time, they wouldn't have had a temple, so they could not sacrifice. All right. Isaiah 43 is talking about the sacrifices they don't have anymore. Right at the bottom, I think we quickly just spoke about that again. Norman actually said earlier about consequences. Right at the bottom, it says bad choices have bad consequences. good choices have good outcomes. You can put underneath that, Confucius says. It's like a fortune cookie. All right, over the page. So as you can see, I've told you that it's kind of back to front. We looked at chapter 39, we looked at chapter 40s on, we looked at chapter 43, and now we're on to chapter 44. Okay. So the 2 pages is just back to front. So now over the page, and now what we're looking at is this one. Are we all on the same page? Okay. It says right at the top, who are the idols of paganism? Isaiah 44, 9-20 talks about the idols that Israel was worshipping, and the prophet exposes the foolishness of idolatry. Romans 1, and consider 1 Corinthians 10. Romans 1 talks about, Paul is writing to the Roman church, and he's talking about the idols, and he says to them, mankind has become so depraved that they started to worship the creature rather than the creator. Cyrus, or Cyrus, it depends on how you pronounce it. I like Cyrus, it just sounds nicer. Isaiah 44 and 45 is a prediction made 150 years before Cyrus, the ruler of the Medes and the Persians, came to power. Prophecy, dun, dun, dun. The book of Daniel reveals the Cyrus factor in restoring Jerusalem and God's temple. Let's go to the Bible. We go to 45. There's just 2 places I can mention. We can kind of start a little bit on 44. Right at the end of chapter 44, it mentions Cyrus. This is important because this book was written 150 years before this man even came on the scene. 150 years. There's not even a chance that he would have been born at that time. So that's why I like this part about Cyrus. In 44, chapter 44, verse 27. Let's just start around there. 27 and 28. It says, who says to the watery deep, be dry, and I will dry up the streams? Who says to Cyrus, his name, he is my shepherd, and I will accomplish all that I please. He will say to Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and of the temple its foundations be laid. And then even if you continue to chapter 45, it continues with that story. This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I will take hold of and subdue nations before him, and so on and so on and so on. So what I like about these 2 chapters is Isaiah predicts that there's going to be a man coming in the future called Cyrus, and he will actually give leniency to the Jews, and they will rebuild the temple and Jerusalem. And 150 years later, that's exactly what happened. There was a guy from the Media Persians. Media Persians, I told you before, it was a dual empire, the Medes, under the rulership of a guy called Darius, the king. And then the Persians was under the leadership of a man called Cyrus. This guy we're talking about. So after the Babylonians had their 70-year rule, the Media Persians took over, and Cyrus became the ruler of the Media Persians. And this is what Isaiah is talking about. And all the Jews were living in exile in Babylon, and he actually sent them back home. He said, listen, go back to your homeland, regroup and restore and rebuild. And they did that. They went back, they rebuilt the temple. I showed you that picture of that little drab, modest-looking temple they built. And they rebuilt the walls through Nehemiah. So Cyrus was instrumental in helping the Jews restore their homeland and rebuild, which is exactly what happened. So I like that part. And in Daniel, he talks about that also. Daniel is an amazing book because it goes through all these different empires. It starts in the Babylonians. It goes through to the Media Persians, because Darius is the one that actually puts Daniel in the lion's den and so forth. So the book of Daniel covers this historical aspect of Cyrus, who was generally a good guy, very lenient to the Jews, and instrumental in actually keeping them in existence, I believe. Because if there could have been a worse king there, like Nebuchadnezzar, they would have probably been wiped out. All right, so then let's go to the next part, the number 3 on that list. It says, no king in exile. The Jews, like the Israelites, were robbed of having their own king, while under the domination and control of the foreign monarchs, Syria, Babylon. The narrative of Daniel is one of importance because it deals with the past events and future global developments that will reshape the world. So this we have done a bit in detail, but for those that do not understand it, we'll quickly run through it again. According to the Bible, there have been 7 great empires. And these empires have 2 things in common. They controlled a large part of the Middle East and Europe, and they all conquered Israel. Okay, so all these empires we talk about have those two things in common. That's why on this list you won't get anything about the Aborigines in Australia or the Native American Empire or Genghis Khan and his empire and the Viking Empire, wherever they might be. Okay, so it's only specific to the Middle East geographically and conquered Israel. All right, controlled Israel. Okay, so we start with Egypt. Egypt, we know from the 430 years that they were enslaved in Egypt. Then Moses came and delivered them. Okay, so the first world empire, at that time they were world empire. They were a vast empire around the Middle East. And they obviously conquered and captured and enslaved the Jews. After them came the Assyrian Empire. That we kind of spoke about in Isaiah already. The Assyrians came from north and they conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. Sennacherib. So we have spoken about him in this lesson already. They tried to conquer the southern part, Jerusalem, but that's why I said the angel killed him and they ran back home. And then that was when the king Hezekiah called the Babylonians in and showed them all his stuff. So who was the next empire to come and control the Jews? The Babylonians. They conquered the Syrians, marched into Jerusalem, stole all their stuff and burnt it to the ground. King Nebuchadnezzar, the book of Daniel. After them came the Persians. The Persians conquered the Babylonians. I told you how that happened. Cyrus, the king of the Persians, deflected the Euphrates River from going through Babylon. And he deflected it and built a canal this way, so all the water would go this way, and then no water would flow through Babylon. So him and his armies literally took Babylon overnight without even raising a sword. He just waltzed under the walls and took them by surprise. Sorry, what did I say? Oh, no, sorry, I'm talking about Jerusalem. Sorry. No, it is bad. No, Babylon's right. It was, Cyrus was taking over the Babylonians. The writing on the wall, remember the sword of the writing on the wall? The last night when the last king, no, it is Babylon, he deflected Euphrates River and marched under the Babylonian city. So that was the Persians under Cyrus. Short-lived because after that there was this young guy from Greece, the first emperor of the Grecian Empire, and his name was Alexander the Great, a young man at 22 years old, conquered the known world in 10 years. At the age of 32, he died of disease in Babylon, and his kingdom was divided between his 4 generals. And because of the conflict between the Grecian Empire, eventually the Romans, at that point was not even a little city on the Tiber River in Italy. It was not anything to worry about. But they saw opportunity. And remember, the Roman Empire started in Rome and Italy, in Western Europe. And then from there, they decided to start moving around. They conquered, obviously, France, the Grecian Empire, Egypt, and eventually became a very, very vast empire, covering all Western Europe, Middle East, and all not all North Africa, a lot of North Africa. All right. And then the last one that we see there on the list, number 7, is called Revived Europe. This one is not yet on the scene, obviously. The empires, there are no empires no more. If you look around Europe and Middle East, they're all countries, independent countries, run by kings and presidents and crown princes of Saudi Arabia. There is no united empire in that area, and also that has controlled or captured or enslaved the Jews. So we're waiting for this empire to still come. All right, and if you look at the picture, there's a picture of a statue. That's in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and it has the same stuff. The last one is the one that we're waiting for, the 10 toes, which is the end-time revival of the Roman Empire. It's called a revived Europe in the sense that it's going to be like, as a dead person would be revived, this old empire of the Roman Empire would be revived and all of a sudden become an empire again. So what we're kind of waiting for, my interpretation is that there's going to be unification of 10 countries within Europe and the Middle East, and they're going to be run by one person. Empire has to be run by one dictator, and this will be the Antichrist. So he'll rule over these 10 kingdoms in the Middle East and Europe, and then he'll subdue 3 of them, and he'll set up his own kingdom, which will be like the 8th one on the list. And that is, we're still waiting for. The only signs of this we have currently is the European Union. It's a union in Europe, but not yet the Middle East. This revived empire has to include the Middle East. It has to have Syria, Iraq, Israel, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan. I don't know about Saudi Arabia. I won't include them on that list yet. Turkey has to be there. So all of those countries have to be included in this list somewhere, because they play a vital part in end times. If you read Ezekiel 38, all these places are mentioned. And the only way they're going to be mentioned is if they form part of these 10 kings. All right, any questions for the 7 empires? Good. We've kind of covered a lot of that over the last lessons. Right at the bottom, it says historical reality. The tragic reality of Israel's resistance to God's plan has been the wandering Jew, a people without a country. As I even said on the message on Sunday, is that from the time of 70 AD, when they were conquered by the Romans, Jerusalem ceased to exist. It became a small little Roman town, and the Jews were scattered all over the world. And they remained all over the world in 1948. It was like a long, long time. Israel was at that time occupied by Arabs and some Jews. Even some Jews were there, but very sparsely populated. And they became known as the wandering Jew. And then if you look at like World War II, where do we find Jews? In Poland, in Germany, in all these places. In America, or from there they went to America. So the wandering Jew means that they don't live in their homeland. They were wandering all over the world. All right. And even in South Africa, there were many Jewish families. Today, not so much, because where are they today? They've gone back home to Israel, yeah. But in 50 years, 100 years ago, South Africa was largely populated by Jewish people, Jewish families. That's where all the synagogues come from. All right. After the war, what? After the Russian Revolution. Well done. Thanks, Emmanuel. Yeah. Okay, so it says the 1948 day of Israel's birth is an uncomfortable reality that conspirators claim is a product of human effort to place Israel in their own homeland. So some people say, no, this is just human effort that the Jews are there. But we think it's a bit more divinely orchestrated. The truth is that historically the Jews' story is a story of God's involvement in human history. Israel is a modern example of God's promises being fulfilled. And we see that in the book of Isaiah, in the book of Daniel, and in the prophecies. Although the Israelites have disobeyed God and done all things, we still believe His hand is upon them in guiding them through to fulfill prophecy. And that's kind of what this is. I don't think it's an accident that they came back to Jerusalem in 1948 and they became an independent state. I think that is divinely orchestrated as part to fulfill prophecy. All right. And again, we're still waiting for the final stuff. The war that's going on now, we don't know what's going to happen. To be honest with you, I think it's going on far too long. Right? I didn't expect it to go on this long. In my mind, there's either going to be an outbreak in Gaza and Israel where it's going to get very, very, very bad, like the brink of World War III or even World War III, when somebody will have to step in and start making some peace negotiations and they'll have to agree to it. At that time, the Arabs and the Jews will sign a peace treaty, and this peace treaty will last for 7 years. And then for the first time in the history of Israel, the Jews and Arabs will live at peace with one another. This is possibly where the temple will be rebuilt. Now that there's peace in the land and they've shaken hands, they'll negotiate and say, okay, listen, you've got your mosque, and rebuild our temple. And it'll probably happen in those 7 years or so. That's one scenario. The other scenario is that this little war that, not I say little very lightly, this war that we've seen in Gaza and Israel will just die down. It's not the first, and it probably won't be the last. There have been hundreds of wars in Israel between Palestinians and the Jews. This is one of the worst ones, with casualties and deaths. But from 1948, literally from 1948, the very next year, from 1949, the wars began. Did you know that? It's called the Arab-Israeli Wars. And from 1949 till 2024, they've been fighting non-stop. That's why we get the places called Golan Heights, the West Bank, and Gaza. These are the Arab states in Israel. They want Israel. Israel's not going to give it to them, and so the fight will begin. And as I said, the war that we see now, this battle between Israel and Palestine or Gaza, will either get very, very bad until it becomes the brink of World War III, or it will just die down, and then in a couple of years' time it will happen again. And then we're waiting for World War III. Literally, that's what we're waiting for. I personally believe the next war that will break out in the world will start in Israel. It will be between the Jews and the Arabs, and it will get so bad that other countries have to get involved, like America, Britain, and the NATO countries. And that will start World War III. And that is what, not what we're waiting for, that is what I believe the Bible is kind of pushing towards. And then this breakout of war will bring in the Antichrist, who will make peace. And then everyone will say, oh, look at this guy, he's awesome. He made peace. Well, if no one else can do that, look how handsome he is. I hope it's not Donald Trump. Or Biden, even worse. Yeah. But that's kind of what I envisage will start happening. All right, so then we finish with part 5. Any questions?